You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, everybody, I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. Now, I'm trying to remember. I don't know why, but it seems like we haven't done a show did we do one last week?
Not last week.
Was it the week before? It was the week before,
Mhm.
right? With the Ahsoka Season 2 thing? All right. That's why. All right. So I'm like, I don't know. It just seems like it's been a minute since we've done a show or something. I don't know. But anyway, Dragonfly's with us. He says, good evening. Let's see. Got Ted. Always like to bring these up. Ted, of course, is like, hey guys, what's up? He also says he almost forgot the notifications got him. See, so that's what's important. It's important. Set those notifications. When you like and subscribe, this usually I don't go into this early, but when you like and subscribe to the channel or you like the video, hit the notification bell because as you can see, it just saved Ted from missing the show. A lot of times, unfortunately, we do have to schedule like we did now. We're supposed to be on yesterday or on today. And I don't often say this, but I actually hope you watch it tonight because we actually got our topic, probably one of our most trolling, annoying viewers. You all know him as Hi. Of course, his name is Dom, and he actually had suggested this episode when he was trolling me at work. And I'm like, you know what? It's actually not a bad topic. So we're actually going to talk about basically what the Disney era Star Wars did, what Star Wars is, Lucasfilm has done under Disney, versus what may have happened had George Lucas stayed in charge. And of course, we have a little bit of evidence of this because there is that treatment. I think you and I talked about it on a show once where we went over what Lucas's 7, 8, and 9 would have looked like if he had been in charge. And I know we referenced it over numerous episodes as well.
Mm-hmm.
But, and that's the thing that I always find kind of funny about these things is that, on one hand, you have everybody going, oh man, I wish Lucas had never sold it. I wish he had just kept making, his projects or whatever. Or, hey, could somebody please bring back George Lucas to save Star Wars and all this? But everybody has a short memory. Because everybody forgets that after the prequels came out, they were accusing Lucas of killing Star Wars. And you ruined my childhood and all that stuff. And that's part of what caused Lucas, by the way, to sell it, is the fact that he got such a blowback from the fans during the prequel era that, he was just like, you know what? I'm done with this. I'm not even going to deal with this anymore. So I think it's important to note that now the grass is suddenly greener on the other side again. You have people now that are saying, oh, well, he should be brought in to save it. But that's what I think a lot of our discussion is going to be tonight is the fact that, he might not necessarily have made anything better. You could arguably say he might have done something, not worse, but something people might have liked less. And or maybe it splits the difference, right? Maybe it's not necessarily better or whatever. Maybe it's just a different kind of a thing. Now, Ted, of course, echoes something that, we all know is true. He says, some people, but not all people. Some people hated the prequels, but we liked them. And yeah, I mean, and of course, where you and I stood, and again, if you go back to our, not right now, obviously, we want you to watch the stream, but if you go back into the channel and watch our What is Star Wars series, you'll see that we actually reviewed every film. And one of the things that I remember us noting, and we've done this over several episodes, by the way, is that episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, that's the one that we generally feel was a good movie. Like, it was a really good, well-made movie. Attack of the Clones is okay. They didn't even really need the Phantom Menace, but I mean, and it had its issues. Dragonfly says Kid Fisto, And that's another thing that's worth bringing up as we frame this discussion tonight, too, is the fact that no matter what you think of the prequels, whether or not you think they were good movies or not, and certainly they had major problems, they did spawn a lot of really great characters. I think that's important. So, I don't know, you have anything to say as an introduction to this whole thing?
Um, I would say that yeah, a lot of people will complain about George and his direction as far as um, the prequel trilogy, and some people didn't like it, and we understand why. But then, of course, then the sequel trilogy comes out, and everybody's like, "No, no, that's all right. Bring George back because this has got awful, right?" And so I think this will probably be my stance going into this conversation, but I think that there is a solution uh, to this particular issue, and um, you know, it's hard to make fans happy, because everybody's going to want something different. Some people want, oh, I want it to look like the original trilogy, but then other people are going to say, oh, well, that's too derivative, and we want to see this, we want to see expansion. No, but see, this is getting away from Star Wars. This is oh, we want to see this, we want to see that, and it's hard to really to try to please everybody with a franchise such as Star Wars. And Star Wars is, we've said it before, it's very unique. It's not like any other franchise that you've seen out. It's not like, Harry Potter or
Right.
Fast and the Furious or Bad Boys or, any of these other franchise. Like Star Wars is just a very unique and uniquely specific um, franchise. And you have to handle it in such a way that you can get the most bang for your buck. And because my question is like, all right, are we bringing back Lucas? Is that for everything or just the saga films? That's my first question.
Well, all right. So I think we could get into this now. Basically, I think what the idea was that had let's just say that Lucas never sold Lucasfilm in 2012, right?
Hmm.
Okay. If he had gone on to make, obviously he would have made that Coruscant 1919 or whatever that series was, this whole little underworld series. If he had done that, if he had continued, his version of the Clone Wars, probably wouldn't have looked too much different because obviously they had already had a lot of season 6 and various stages of production. Season 7, I don't know, might have been a little bit different because you do have because season 7 of the Clone Wars was purely Filoni's thing, right? Whereas
Hmm.
had Lucas never sold it, obviously Filoni still would have had his say in it or whatever. But I don't necessarily think it would have looked the same. Like I don't necessarily think it would have been the same type of deal. You know what I mean? It's like it would have been the same, but it would have been different. And then moving on from there, obviously Lucas would have done his version of the sequel trilogy. He had already been talking to Carrie Fisher and Mark Hamill. He already basically got them on board. So I mean, he was actually working on a lot of this stuff beforehand. And there's some things that fans universally either didn't like or were at least questioning. Like they were talking about the whole little, nano uh,
Hmm.
whatever they were, like nano life forms or something that it was almost like it was the midi chlorians on steroids, right? It's like you're furthering explaining. Now you're explaining like the mechanics of the force or something. So there were elements that they didn't like, but a lot of people did like his whole idea of making Maul the villain and then having you know, um, basically his apprentice, Darth Talon. And so, I mean, there were some cool things, right? I mean, it's like, it's no different than when we made that whole comparison between what would have been Colin Trevorrow's version of Episode 9, Duel of the Fates, versus what we ended up getting, The Rise of Skywalker. And I think it should be noted in this whole discussion that, look, we can basically speculate on this. Obviously, there's no way of knowing because even though we had the script of Duel of the Fates, so I mean, you could actually take that comparison and go, look, there's definitely something, you know, tangible there that you can directly compare. But the problem is, it could be a great script, but you don't know how that would have turned out as a film. So, you can look at the story, and I guess you can't even really compare the finished film of The Rise of Skywalker to Duel of the Fates. You would have just had to look at basically the stories and go, all right, which story was actually better. And in a similar fashion, I think that you have to do the same thing with this, although it's more speculative because all we had were treatments. Is that, do you like the direction better? And had Lucas done it, do we think that Star Wars would have either been more successful, although it's hard to argue its success. I mean, each of those movies made like a couple $1 billion and set box office records. But would it have maintained Star Wars' reputation? And had it not, would it be as much in the toilet, in other words? And then, of course, you got to look at the whole Mandalorian and all that stuff. Like, what would Lucas have done? So I think overall, it's kind of an interesting little, you know, speculation.
Well, here's my stance on the whole deal, and I think Star Wars would have benefited from both Lucas and Filoni because I think you need Lucas for the saga films, especially. However, for the Mandalorian, your Starfighter, your Ahsoka's, your uh, uh, Acolyte, maybe, I think those would have been better left in the hands of Filoni. And I think if you couple those two together, you have, master and apprentice, essentially, right? And I think they can lean on each other for various things. Because in the animated world, Filoni is king. I mean, like all his animation stuff, Rebels, the Clone Wars, um, what was the other one?
Well, I mean, he did the
Uh,
Maul Shadow Lord series. He did Bad
Maul
Batch.
Shadow Lords, yeah,
You
Bad
know,
Batch. That's what I was thinking about.
yeah,
Bad
all
Batch,
those.
right? So all those like were hits, and they told great stories. So it's not like Filoni can't tell a good story. It's just that he doesn't have the acumen just yet telling it on film. Now, George, of course, he has the acumen of telling it on film. However, where he lacks is direction. And I think if you would have had George write the story, Filoni can help with dialogue, with directing, things of that nature, almost like an Irvin Kershner. Um, I think you would have, and of course, he'll probably still bring in his friends like Spielberg to look things over and, um, take a gander at how that is coming across. But I think if they would have divvied up the responsibilities in that way, almost like president, vice president type of thing, master apprentice, however you want to look at it. Um, that would have been I think that would have been almost like a match made in heaven because I think you can get the best of both worlds. I think you can get, the future in Filoni, but the guidance of a George.
No doubt about it. I mean, when you look at, you know, basically, obviously, there's strengths and weaknesses to both of these guys. And the other thing that I think is unspoken as well is you wouldn't have Kathleen Kennedy's meddling in it either. I mean, Lucas would have just
Absolutely.
maintained absolute control, and he would have been the one to
Yep.
just be like, look, you know, he would he would, because the thing about Lucas that was always great, no matter what you think of some of the actual projects that he's done, is that he never really let outside influences color his vision. You know, he was not concerned about marketing. He wasn't concerned about any of that stuff. First and foremost, he's a filmmaker, independent filmmaker. And what he cares about is telling the story he wants to tell in the way he wants to tell it. And of course, he had Filoni there as sort of like, you know, like you said, I mean, it's basically his apprentice, right? He was probably planning on passing the baton to him to a certain degree. But I think it's important to note, though, that Filoni did rise up and even beyond just an apprentice, he became somewhat of a junior partner in the whole thing. Now, Dragonfly says, I think when Filoni finally finishes Ahsoka's saga, what comes next will be his best work. Ahsoka is a character too personal, you know, that's personal to him, and I think the character is holding him back. It's the last tie to George. And look, I mean, that could very well be the case. We'll talk about that in a second. Let's just say hi to David. He says, hello, gentlemen, it's Star Wars Day. So, hey, David, good to see you. Yeah, I think that, and that's a thing too. I mean, what do you think? Because obviously, Ahsoka crosses both the Lucas era and the Disney era. I mean, she was created in the Lucas era and featured prominently during that time. So I don't know if there would have been necessarily a huge difference. I mean, obviously, the projects would have, you know, there's a lot of things. It's the butterfly effect, right? I mean, one little ripple and it just like everything becomes affected. So you can't, excuse me, you can't really say definitively. I mean, obviously, again, we understand this is a speculative exercise. It's just one of those kind of fun shows to figure it out, you know? So there is a little bit of suspension of disbelief you have to have here because obviously we can't absolutely know. However, I mean, do you agree that, and I mean, I kind of agree with Dragonfly on this one. Do you think that Ahsoka is holding him back?
No, I don't. I don't think it's holding him back. I mean,
head to head.
no, I don't think it's holding him back. In fact, I would argue and say that, you know, this should be his launch forward. I think because it is so personal to him, and I get that, you know, it's a character that he created. It's kind of his baby, but I think that's all the more reason why you should, you know, go all in with it because it's like, you know, like I've said, I think the problem with Star Wars right now is that, especially when it comes to the saga films, you haven't created a character like a Luke Skywalker in a sense of a character that we care about, like a Princess Leia and a Han, right? Ahsoka essentially has become that character if you really think about it, because throughout the Clone Wars we've said this before. She's the only character we've seen go from a child to a full-grown adult.
Yep.
And so we've seen her being, you know, having tutelage from Yoda to Plo Koon to Mace to Yoda, Anakin, Obi-Wan, right? So she's got a wealth of, you know, like she's pretty much been counseled or mentored by the entire Jedi Council, you know, in a way.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, to that point, you could almost make the argument that she would have more of a right than Rey to say, I am all the Jedi, because she's actually been trained by like a ton of them.
Absolutely. But I think when we're talking about Filoni, though, it's like, okay, you have a character that you've crafted so well that we've seen her, you know, go from a, you know, the little sky guy and, you know, Artui and all that little crap to now she's like this formidable master of the Force in a way, then now it's like, okay, you have that, and what do you do with it? Like you have them. It's almost like, uh, case in point, you and I both love the show Smallville. So we watched Clark as a freshman in high school coming in, him and his little friends, Pete and Chloe, and they're doing their little. He's got to save, the little teenage people, and okay, but then we're waiting the whole time. Out of 10 seasons, we're waiting to get him to Superman. He's got to become the guy. He's got to put on the suit. He's got to fly. He's got to be Superman. Okay, well, what do you do with him now? Like when you get him to this point, he's Superman. Now, of course, they end the series, but like in this particular situation, you have now the next saga of Ahsoka, who is a character that we already established that we care about because that's why we're watching the show. That's why we've been following her since in Rebels and the Clone Wars and everything like that. So you've developed a character, a Luke Skywalker type character, but now what do you do with her? You have, and I want to use the Miyagi thing. It's like best karate now let out. Like let Ahsoka free, and not saying that it's holding him back, but like okay, let her be that person. Let her be the Luke Skywalker. And that's why I say I don't think it's holding him back. I think it's just that he's just not, at least as of yet, really going to the max with this.
Well,
And I think if he did that, I think people would be all about it.
yeah, and I mean, it's kind of funny because I actually agree with everything that you said. At the same time, I 100% agree with Dragonfly, and I think it's because this is one of those cases where I think both can be true. Because yes, you're right. I mean, Ahsoka is definitely now somewhat the anchor character, even though they were trying to make it like Rey and all that stuff theatrically.
Hmm.
Um, Really, if you look franchise wide here, Ahsoka is the bridge from the old and the new, and she's definitely that central figure, especially being a Jedi. And it's kind of like, let's face it. If Rey ever faced Ahsoka, it would be over in like, well, now that they made her a Palpatine, I don't know. I guess you could debate that too. But experience wise, though, and so I think a lot of that is true. Is that you do have this character, and this goes into what you're saying. It's like, okay, well, what do you do with her now? You probably want to continue making projects that feature her in some way because it's a bankable character, number one. And number two, it's also in universe a character that makes sense to put a lot of focus,
Hmm.
at least initially, on her. However, I think we're with Dragon because a lot of this stuff is true, but and this is where I think, I'm guessing here because it's not like Dragonfly actually was explicit in the point, but I think that in a lot of ways, because he's so focused on the Ahsoka character, it's limiting him from breaking beyond the Skywalker saga. It's basically like he's been somewhat obsessed with that character because he created her. And as Dragonfly points out, it is the last tie to George that it's very difficult to break out of this mold and really expand. Now again, I will preface that statement though by saying we do need to wait for something like Starfighter because Starfighter is probably going to be the first project that we see that takes place outside of the Skywalker saga.
Hmm.
And that could be amazing. Now, of course, you got Tom Cruise like shooting half of it now, which is kind of strange. But it's still. I think that you it's sort of like a weird dynamic, and I think again, and you and I brought this up before. The key is balance, right? You have to balance moving forward with Ahsoka and telling more stories because the character just frankly, is worthy of that. But at the same time, you can't just put all your focus into this one character because, number one, you created her. Number two, it's the most marketable character you probably, arguably have. And then, all the rest, right? So, I don't know. I think that there's a balance to be had there. Now, of course, Dragonfly chimes in, says, "Well said, Daryl. I do wonder if she'll sacrifice herself or get, to ride off to the sunset." Ending, he goes on to say that he agrees with basically my reassessment at his point. And he then finishes by saying, "We hear her first Force Ghost in, The Rise of Skywalker." It's actually the movie. So, again, I think it is, as you pointed out, I mean, it's definitely a character that you have to do it. Now, we have a forgotten 70s FM. Somebody I don't think has chatted before says, "Kill her off, create all new characters, go total nihilism." And that's one of those things. Again, this is one of the struggles that I think Star Wars really legitimately has to face. It's one of those things where they're going to have to wrestle with going on the familiar. A lot of these characters that we've had for, pretty much 50 years now, right? And let's face it, there is proof that even though a lot of detractors accuse Lucasfilm of just recycling these same characters and mining the, cash cow, so to speak, the expanded universe is pretty much proof that people want stories within, let's just say, the Skywalker saga. So I mean, there's that. On the other hand, as Forgotten is saying, there is also that idea that the Skywalker saga and its characters are somewhat holding Star Wars down a little bit.
Well, see, I think what they and I don't know if they have a still. I don't know if they still have a way to do this. Um, I think what they tried to do with the sequel trilogy is they tried to pass the torch with the original trilogy characters with Leia, Han, and Luke. It didn't. It wasn't executed, well.
That was a big mistake, yeah.
Right now, I think you could rectify that though. Again, because of Ahsoka, like you aforementioned, she's been around for the Clone Wars. She's, so she understands the history of the Jedi, kind of at their zenith or one of the peaks of their time, right? And if you're going to create a new Yoda, a new Grandmaster of the Force, a new Luke, Luke's gone, Yoda's gone, it would make sense to have her be the new Yoda, so to speak, or Luke, and then you have her train up Rey, train up the next group, and really delve into to growing the new characters, your Finn, your Poe. If you want to bring all that in, I think she would be the one that could legitimately hold that down, and it's not jarring to people because look, she was back there doing the Clone Wars, and she went up against Vader. She's gone up against, some Asajj. She's gone up against Dooku. She's gone up against Maul. She's gone up against like all these people, right? And mind you. So now you have a not Bo-Katan, Sabine. So you have Sabine. You have some other characters. If you want to you want to start with fresh characters, fine. But make Ahsoka like, hey, I'm I'm the standard. I'm the new queen of the Jedi Order. Okay, I'm going to get you guys started. I'm going to make sure that you guys are growing, you guys are solidified. So then by the third movie, if I die, it's everything's in good hands because I've trained you for two movies. You've gotten really good training. You've gotten a lot of experience. So now, if I die in the third act, so shall we say, it's okay because no different than Yoda. You got, the reins are yours now.
Well, I would definitely agree with that, but I mean, first they have to try to make Ahsoka the focal point of even her own series.
I know.
You
That's
know,
my
I mean,
point.
it's
Well,
like,
that's why I said, like, from the onset, is that what's holding Filoni back, so to speak, is you got to dive in with Ahsoka. Like, you had this character, you've built her to be Superman. Okay, let her be Superman. Let her be, you know, the Jedi Master, essentially, that she is. But stop, nickel and diming it and having her keep folding her arms and reluctant to do this. You're wasting time. No, show her as a butt kicker. Show her as wise and intelligent. And this is how you do this. And it's like, oh, okay. Let me show you a trick on how to, okay, you're having problems with this. Let me, you're showing Ahsoka in all of her glory. So then now it's like, okay, we truly really respect her now. So now when you have Sabine or somebody else coming up who wants to become a Jedi, some random, or it's Rey or Finn or whoever, it makes sense now.
yeah.
Or even Ezra, or
By
even
the
like I said,
way, Travis says,
forgot
"How's
about
it
him.
going, guys?"
Hey,
Yeah.
Travis.
Well, I mean, yes,
That's the
there's
other unsung one too. Is that now you still got Ezra out there. What do you do with him?
well, there's a lot of characters that they could obviously feature. I mean, this is a problem that the Filoni verse in particular has. You basically have a wealth of really cool characters that have not really been fleshed out very well, at least in live action.
Hmm.
And we're sort of hoping that Ahsoka season 2 fixes a lot of this stuff. On the other hand, there really isn't a whole lot that is telling me like, "Hey, I think this is going to work out." But again, you still have that tug of war though, because again, it's sort of like, okay, this is what happens when a franchise is almost 50 years old. You've created all these characters that are essentially part of a singular timeline.
Hmm.
It's basically a singular story arc if you think about it. I mean, granted,
Hmm.
yes, there's a lot of things happening,
Yeah,
subplots or whatever, but I mean, it's
sure.
basically part of what we call the Skywalker saga. Not like we named it, but I mean, it's like we meaning Lucasfilm, Star Wars fans, whatever. And so essentially the problem comes, and this is where I keep going back to this. It's a twofold issue. On one hand, there's a lot of mining you can do with all these wonderful characters and these worlds and all that stuff. I'm the guy that always defends like the comics where they're going, "Hey, we're gonna tell like a bunch of stories that happened between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi." And of course, immediately all the detractors, critics, toxic fans, and whatnot are like, "Oh, geez, can we just move past this?" But my whole thing is like, well, you don't understand. I mean, there's actually a lot that you could delve into in this that is interesting and that is good storytelling. Flip side of that, though, is that you also risk being handcuffed by your own lore in this sense. Because by not stepping outside of this singular storyline, you're beholden to it, which
Hmm.
means you have to be very, very careful about the continuity. You can't create more plot holes than what have already been created just by the fact that this franchise is so old now or long running, for being And there's there are arguments definitely of, you know what? Let's tell stories within the Star Wars universe that take place outside of this. Now, my biggest argument against even that for a while is like, okay, if you want to tell stories outside of the Skywalker saga, you have to decide where you're going to tell the stories, meaning what timeline, because if you tell the story within the backdrop of when the Galactic Empire is in charge, invariably it's going to color no matter what story, because this is like a galaxy-wide thing. It's a galaxy-wide event. It's almost like, if you were telling stories in Germany during World War II, you would be forced to deal somewhat with World War II, no matter what the story was. Simply because if you're telling a story during that time period in that particular geography, you have to deal with what was actually going on at the time. So it's sort of like if I wanted to tell some story about some German couple or something, like maybe, I don't know, like a romantic comedy or whatever. I know it's kind of weird, but, just go with me on this. Then I would have to do one of two things. I would either have to set it against the backdrop of World War II, and obviously it's not the focal point of the story because it's not a war story, it's a romantic comedy, but I would have to at least reference
Acknowledge.
that. Yeah, and acknowledge that. Or the flip side of that is I would have to just tell it either in the 1920s or, like the 1980s or something. I mean, it's like for something that's prominent, like the Galactic Empire, basically choking out all these worlds, it's like, okay, well, that's just going to be the backdrop of it. So it's sort of like, okay, yes, you could tell stories that are outside of the Skywalker saga, but if they're set during that era, though, you have to acknowledge or reference in some way what's going on. You can't have, I mean, the only way you could get around that is if you try to sell the idea that it's a world that's untouched by the Empire. That's about the only thing you can
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think this is where George comes in because Filoni has these characters that he's created. They're great characters. You got Ezra, Ahsoka, Sabine, Hera, right? You get someone like George to show you how to flesh them out and create stories that makes you care about them. And I think you're off to the races, and that's why I say you like it's a tag team. It's George knows how to, you know, move the. He's the brain, but like I put it this like he's the brain, but Filoni are the legs, and you need fresh legs to kind of like okay, run the race. But it's the knowledge of how to run, how to pace yourself, how to do those things that you need the brain for, and that's where George comes in. And that's why I think like it sucks that George had to leave. I think even if George was doing something crazy or out of this world, I think Filoni has a grip enough and knows enough to be like, I don't know, George. It's a lot out there,
do. Yeah,
you
yeah, you
know.
could do that
To
without
to
question.
and George has enough respect for Filoni to maybe reconsider it.
Right, but I think this is another part of it too. I mean, the other thing that I think that is important to note here is the fact that if you take like even just more micro stories, because that's the other thing, right? Star Wars, the big battles, the big everything's macro. It's usually, you know, some form of a rebellion, whether it's the resistance, the rebels, whatever, against the Empire or First Order or whatever it is, right? It's like,
Hmm.
and that's basically what you're telling, and that's basically where you're going. Now, you can take I mean, if you take like the scene from The Last Jedi, no, it wasn't The Last Jedi, it was Force Awakens, where Han and all those guys are on the ship, and then the pirates came and confronted Solo, and the Rathtar got loose
Okay.
and started going crazy, right? Well, I
Yep.
mean, if you tweak that scene a little bit, you basically have the entire Alien. Like, if you think about what the movie Alien, and really a lot of its sequels, it basically became, some creature got, invaded a ship or whatever and got loose and started hunting all the crew and everything else. And so if you start to micronize your storytelling, you could actually still tell stories within, the whole Skywalker era. Like, you don't have to go High Republic, Old Republic, you know, beyond the First Order. Like, none of that. You could still do it, but because the story is so contained, you almost don't even need to reference or acknowledge the greater backdrop because you never really see it. I mean, other than it might be in, the opening crawl or something. So, I mean, that's another thing. And then, of course, I had even argued that you could take storylines from um, the original Zahn trilogy, Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, Last Command, and just swap out the original characters with Poe, Finn, and Rey, and you can,
Hmm.
you know, I mean, you could still put Talon Card in there. You could do a lot of different things where you basically keep that same storyline, and you can keep Thrawn in there too if you wanted to. Or there was a lot of people that said, well, it would have to be either or because the sequel trilogy is episode 7, 8, and 9. So you can't tell the Thrawn, the Timothy Zahn one anymore. I'm like, well, why not? Because the Zahn 7, 8, and 9 actually occurred like literally immediately after Return of the Jedi. Well, that's like a full 30 years before the sequel trilogy. I mean, to be honest, both versions of episode 7, 8, and 9 could have existed in the same universe. Like, you wouldn't even need to swap out characters or do all that stuff to make it work. Because a lot of times that's what people say, right? They go, well, you know, in order to make those as movies or even an animated thing or whatever, it's sort of like, you don't want to confuse people. So you would have to somehow like make this massive announcement that you're going to reboot 7, 8, and 9 and replace it with Zahn's trilogy. And my point's been, no, you don't. You can perfectly keep the theatrical episode 7, 8, 9 that we got from Disney Lucasfilm and still make Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, and The Last Command all characters intact because it occurs so many years before the actual 7, 8, and 9 that we got. So literally, you can have both 7, 8, and 9s. I mean, there's things like that you can do. Let me get to some of these chats because they've been building up quite a bit. Basically, Travis and Dragonfly. So Travis says, uh, one corner Disney Star Wars may be backing itself into is having too many blando commandos, as I call them. People who can just shoot everyone really well, but don't really grow. And that kind of goes into your point where you're talking about character development and flesh these people out. He goes on to say, Fennec, Cara Dune, even Mando in the recent film. There isn't much there except a cool person who almost always wins. Lucas had those Spielberg indie quirks. Heroes did dumb things to humanize them. And that doesn't include, by the way, chasing little mice around or like droids around like
Ratatouille.
Boba Fett. Yeah, right. He goes on to say, in Phantom Menace, people critique how Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon are flat, largely emotionless. By episode 3, our characters are laughing, cracking jokes, getting scared and hurt. Um, Says Tasu Leech, good to see you. Then he goes on to say, the Rathtar scene is such a standout scene in that trilogy. You get so much history and world building with one-off characters you want to see again. And that was part of my point too. Is the fact that I mean, you get these interesting guys like Concha Club and all this stuff, and it's like, wait, you could have just done something with that. And then finally, Dragonfly says Ahsoka season 2 and that the Filoni movie is heir to the Empire. That's a lot of possibility. So yeah, I mean, it basically is going on with what we've been saying, but absolutely that Travis's last point where the Rathar scene and everything. There was so much meat in that scene. You could have almost spun that off into its own thing. Because that's when we got to see Harrison Ford being the smuggler. Not Harrison Ford, basically. Solo. Being the smuggler, and it was like the side thing. And I remember watching it going, I'm almost more interested in this than I am what's everything else that's going on.
Well, yeah, but I think because one, we know Han, we care about Han. He's become a beloved character. So, and that's my point, is that you have to make us care. Like, we don't care about Poe, we don't care about Finn. So what? Like, what I'm saying, and that's the unfortunate part about the sequel trilogy, is we don't care, and it's hard to
Succinctly
have.
put, but very, very true.
Yeah, and it's hard to have characters who you don't care about.
Yeah.
Because it's like, okay, all right. Yeah, Finn used to, not Finn. Poe used to be a spice runner. Okay, that was nice to know. Finn, you pretty much grew up as a baby in the First Order, and then you was over sanitation, and then they got short-handed because people called in sick, and so you need to pick up a blaster, and because you've been through basic training, you popped up on, with Kylo Ren to wipe out this whole little village. Okay, we don't care. Now, had they actually gone through with the idea of him being force sensitive and him actually getting to tell Rey that in the film, now I think you can start creating some things to come. But because you had that and you still didn't even, you let that die. So now we really don't care about Finn.
Which is a tragedy, by the way, because this is what Disney Star Wars was really good at. Because if you look at the way that Lucas framed a lot of this stuff in the original trilogy, right? We found out Han was a smuggler. He owed this guy, Jabba the Hutt, a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We didn't get a lot of backstory there either. That was almost like a couple of lines that would, recur every once in a while. And I'm not talking about when they actually finally put it in the special edition where you saw that, which I thought was actually, even though the effect was a little wonky. I did think that it added something by putting that in there. But even if you just take the theatrical release on its own merit, Lucas was good at giving us the backstory to reflect the character's current motivations and basically make us care about them. We started to care that Han owed Jabba money, and we felt the sense of urgency that he felt of, okay, I really got to pay off this debt or somebody's going to kill me, versus I also feel like I really need to help these people. And he did that without, going into this whole expository thing.
Exactly, and that's my point. Like, you got to make us, however you do it. I don't care if it's expository or if it's, But see, the cool thing about what Lucas did, which I thought was great, was that like he breadcrumbed us, right? So
exactly.
when we meet Han, in the cantina, okay, he's gonna, Luke and Obi-Wan are trying to meet with him about, hey, I'm trying to get to Alderaan, and we just don't want an Imperial entanglement. But then Greedo pops up, and I'm talking about before the special editions, right?
Right.
So Greedo pops up, and then that whole exchange, that whole conversation, it's like, okay. Then you see the whole him unbuckling his blaster and him getting the shot off, right? So then you have that. Then it's like, all right, so now we get there. Then they blast off. Then they eventually get caught in the tractor beam. Now they're running around the Death Star. Okay. So then, breadcrumb number 2. Hey, listen, sweetheart, I'm not in this for your revolution. I'm in it for the money. Like, again, you're reminded why he's involved in this whole thing anyway. Like, look,
Right.
I don't even want to be here. I just came because I was trying to do this thing for these guys. They said they would need to get something to you, and then somehow get chased around this giant space station. Look, no reward is worth this. Again, we're breadcrumbing, right? So then we get to Yavin 4. And now he has a conversation with Luke. And Luke is like, hey man, why don't you come help us out? Hey, look, man, I gotta go. And he's like, oh, you got your money, so you just gonna leave? He's like, hey, look, man, hey, I did what you guys asked me to do. What are you squawking at me for? And so again, we're reminded. But then when Han actually does show up, it's like he's the most unsuspecting person, because the whole time he's been trying to get out of there so he can pay these people, but he shows up again. So this is like, and not only does he show up, he shows up at the most critical moment, at the biggest, and takes out the biggest gun, Vader, ironically at the time. So we care about Han. Then, okay, he gets a medal for his heroism. And then what happens even in Empire? Hey, I gotta pay Jabba. Yeah, a bounty. And what did the guy say? A bounty is a hard thing to shake, or a bounty on a man's head, or something like. So again, it's like we still care, and he's still pulling that thread of I gotta get to Jabba. So now
it goes to the whole thing, right? I mean,
that's what I'm saying. Like,
I mean, the whole, but again, it's like you said,
to,
it's little nuggets. Now,
yeah,
contrast that with, we get this great nugget about, hey, this former stormtrooper guy has a human moment and wants to defect. And now Finn's storyline is very similar to Han's in a lot of ways. Now, they did do the breadcrumb thing. There was every once in a while he would bring up, hey, listen, you know what? I'm not really into this whole thing. But again, it was poorly done, and they could have explored so many different facets of a defecting stormtrooper. I mean, that's something we'd never seen before.
True, but see, my thing is you didn't give him a purpose. Like,
right.
Okay, so with Han, he was leaving because he had a debt to pay. Finn was just running just to run. I don't want to be, no, I don't, I'm trying to get away from the First Order. But it wasn't like he was like, I want to go to get away from the First Order because I believe I'm Force sensitive and I'm going to need to find a Jedi that's going to train me to become a Jedi. No, that's not what's happening. He just wants to run.
Yeah, well, would have actually been, it would have been cool in discussing this. You remember the scene when Han was kind of like, yeah, the Force, all that, that's all true. Everything. I used to think it was.
Right,
that would have been right. That would have been a cool catalyst for Finn to go, hey, this is explaining some things that I've been feeling. I need to go figure out what this is all about. And now, yeah, see, I mean,
see,
again.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Like, you're giving him a purpose, but like when he's just like, okay, well, I'm just trying to get far away from the First Order and do what? Nothing. I just want to be away. I just want to start my life over and just.
Well, that they could have actually delved into
be a moisture farmer or something. I don't know. But I mean, it's kind of like you're not leading him anywhere, and so it's kind of like, at least every time you stop Han, it's because he has a bigger purpose that he's trying to get to.
Yep.
So he thinks.
All right, well, let me get to some of these chats because there's a ton of them. Travis says, I don't want to bash the sequels. All right, we do it. Because Disney Star Wars is larger than those, but one major difference is so many things from the start of the sequels don't come back by the end. Exactly. Right. There's no rhythm, there's no rhyme, there's no poetry in it. It's, just leave stuff hanging. Like the whole Maz Kanata thing about, hey, that's a story for another time. It's like, really? When? A book?
When?
Like a
Yeah,
comic?
exactly.
Is that what we're going to get
Yeah.
explained? I mean, you don't drop a nugget like that and then never explain it in the entire trilogy. All right, whatever. So then he goes in the
Well, when you said,
original.
I know the Force, like, okay, well, how?
Yeah,
Never explained.
right. She's like 1,000 years old, too. In the original trilogy, literally every idea or character set up from the start paid off by the end, down to Jabba the Hutt. Only mentioned in the first film. I think our plot could have come back. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. And Forgotten 70s FM says, couldn't agree more. It was like the Cliff Notes of Star Wars. Travis goes on to say, comparing trilogies, by the end, we are theoretically looking at the strongest versions of those characters. Yet by Return of the Jedi, everyone gets their butt kicked. The sequel characters don't. Well, the reason why the sequel characters don't is because there were no challenges. Like, if you actually look at The Rise of Skywalker, I mean, they literally fell into everything without any, and I mean 0 challenges. There was
Resistance.
no tension. There was no nothing. It was kind of like Luke had been looking for that stupid, like, thing, with the dagger for years. They stumble onto it. Then they happen to be at the same spot where, that whole shape in the dagger would show them. I mean,
the wayfind, yeah.
Yeah. There's 0. It's like everything just came so easily for them. The only time that you really felt any kind of tension in the movie was a lot of the Rey and Kylo scenes. But other than that, that's why.
Or the only other when they thought that no one was coming.
Yeah,
That's about the only time.
that was another good one. Travis says when the OT heroes fall into a pit, it takes a blind one, his friend, to hold his feet to rescue one who's being pulled in, panicking. Sequels, they all fall and they're fine. Yeah, that's the thing. It's like that's what I mean. It's just like everything is fine. Forgotten basically is like, yeah, I mean everything in the sequels lines up perfectly because the plot says so, and we aren't going to explain how. It just does. Right, and then they'll throw out all these like dyads in the Force, and just like it's a matter of fact, or the one that we always talk about, where you spend, and we're just looking at the sequel trilogy. You spend all this time going, the Jedi, I thought they were a myth, all this other stuff, right? And keep in mind, like with Jedis, there's like tens of thousands of these guys. The Sith only had 2 operating at any given time, secret to even the Empire. Like, even the Empire didn't know that Vader or Palpatine were Sith Lords. There were a few that did, but most, like, the rank and file did. And in fact, even the comics say this well. Like, they all hated Vader. They thought he was some clown. It's like, who's this guy? But yet, when you go to the Rise of Skywalker, they're throwing the Sith name around like it's common knowledge. Oh, the Sith. Oh, yeah. It's like, wait a minute. You just spent episode 7 telling us that, oh, I thought the Jedi were a myth. It's like, but yet 2 movies later, and you're talking about the Sith as if it's some sort of common knowledge. So that's a good example of what Forgotten. Travis says, that all said, I think The Last Jedi does the best job of humanizing the character, taking them out of their comfort zone and challenging. Yeah,
I would agree.
I would agree with that too. Forgotten says, I think The Last Jedi made me question galactic fuel pricing and logistics.
Oh, yeah, that ship had definitely good gas mileage.
Yeah, it did, right. Travis says, Finn's solution for disguising BB-8, need to put a trash can over his head, which to us may look like a droid. To them, that just looks like a trash can now. We need more of that, I think. And I mean, that was cool. There were some things. Forgotten says, Star Wars and Practical Jokers edition. I'd watch that. Yeah, I mean, and again, it's like, we're not really ones to completely bash the sequels either. I mean, it sounds like it. I mean, if you listen to
Very
us
easy to.
talk, and in fact, if you actually watch our reviews, it definitely sounds like it. But the thing that I think is important to note here is that we're trying to be as objective as possible. You know, we talk about the good and we talk about the bad. We don't really let any real biases, and I mean, it's to the point now where I don't necessarily have any bias really either way. You know, I mean, even being there from the very beginning, Star Wars, it's like there was probably a time because I remember watching the Phantom Menace in the theater, and I I really liked it, but it wasn't quite as good as I expected it. Like I had a lot of issues with it, but I didn't want to admit it because it was the first time I was seeing Star Wars in the theater since I was like
Hmm.
13 years old, right? With Return of the Jedi. And I was just so happy that there was a new Star Wars movie. And being that it's Star Wars, I'm like, well, I can't say anything bad. It's Star Wars. You know, I mean, this is like the movies that are pushing, you know, boundaries in filmmaking, and it's Star Wars. So there was a little bit of that. Plus, I had been knee deep in the expanded universe by that point. This is like '99. Expanded universe started in '91. So I mean, I was still kind of there, but I mean, I know as our show has gone, neither one of us, if something sucks, we'll say it. Let's see. Travis has a couple. Get these. He says, Rise of Skywalker begins. The heroes all have tasks listed in the crawl that they all complete with no challenge. Star Wars movies should begin with a goal in the crawl that goes wrong right away. Yeah, I mean, I would be. He says Ben goes to find Palpatine. Imagine he kills him, then takes the fleet. Poe and Finn get intel on Palpatine. Imagine they get captured. Then Rey is distracted from training, leaving to save them, which would sort of mirror Empire Strikes Back a little.
Yeah.
Which would be fine because The Force Awakens was intentionally designed to mirror A New Hope. So, I mean, that would have been nice.
Right.
Travis goes on to say, once you throw a wrench in every plot point, it suddenly feels a bit more like a Star Wars. And that's a point I hadn't really thought of before, but it's kind of true, right? I mean, usually there's like a plan and then something goes wrong with it, and then that's basically what gives it a little bit of that Star Wars feel.
Hmm.
And so again, The Rise of Skywalker was a really fun movie, but unfortunately, uh, is a little bit too fast paced. The pacing was off, and then of course all the other problems. But what's funny about it is that we've talked about a lot of the issues with the Disney Star Wars, but now as we're pretty much wrapping this thing up, I mean, what do you think though, Lucas wise, if he had remained in control, you know, we touched on it, of course, but I mean, specifically, if he had done 7, 8, 9, if
It
he
would have
had,
been better.
I tend to agree. I think that it probably would have been better. It probably would have been better made. And honestly, because we jump on that whole nano thing. If he had presented it in the right way, it might not have sucked. And even if it did, I think if that's the worst thing that happens, because we all hate the midi chlorian thing too.
Hmm.
But that oddly enough, that's not what really knocked down the Phantom Menace. I mean, you start with Jar Jar, of course. You work your way down. But yeah, I think I agree with you on there. I would rather see George Lucas's version because I think even the Maul Talon relationship would have just been really cool. And then of course they had Kira, which was spelled differently than the Kira we know from Solo.
Hmm.
And that was basically like kind of the Rey stand-in. Like that's what Rey was sort of based on. And then there was a Rey in there too. So, but Rey was spelled differently as well. Travis says, while Mando and Grogu is a much better movie, I think it still has that same issue where we spend 15 minutes watching Mando shoot his way out of situations knowing he's going to succeed. Yeah, better, and still probably got Ahsoka from Dragonfly. The only thing I'll say about that whole thing is I didn't necessarily have a problem with that because, look, it's kind of like the John Wick concept. If that's basically, if we had just gotten a Mandalorian movie that was essentially John Wick in Star Wars, I would have been completely fine with it. You know, I mean, I think that actually that's the in the Mandalorian's case, I think that that's where they needed to do that because my issue with season 1 in particular of the Mandalorian was the fact that you build this guy up to be this just butt-kicking dude or whatever, and he gets his butt handed to him in virtually like every battle.
It's like this Superman James Gunn movie.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like, okay, I thought this guy was like this really, awesome Mandalorian or whatever. It's like, it wasn't until Boba Fett came in that you were kind of like, yeah, all right, now that's what I'm talking about. And then, of course, as time went on, Din got a lot better. So when I saw him doing what he was doing in the Mandalorian and Grogu film, I was all about it. I'm like, okay, finally, we're seeing this guy come into his own. That's really what they were trying to do was like over the course of the seasons and then finally with this film go, okay, Din's kind of feeling it out, right? He's trying to find himself. I don't know. All right.
Alrighty.
I think that's it. So I think we all agree that, we would have rather have taken the chance with Lucas's vision versus Disney's vision. So I guess that's going to be the way it stands. Now, unfortunately, we're stuck with Disney, everybody. I think now I'm trying to remember the timeline here. When does Ahsoka season 2? Is that next year?
Yeah.
But is it before Starfighter?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, yeah.
All right. Because I'm just trying to keep a handle on, like, when these projects are coming out, all that stuff. Didn't they move everything to 2027? I don't know if there's anything else coming out this year.
Yeah, I think this is we're pretty much done.
Well, if anything changes, obviously we'll bring.
We had Shadow Lord and we had Mandalorian and Grogu.
Yep.
So
everything might have been more on the front end. Oh, I know there is that Visions thing, that Ninth Jedi project.
And then next year also is the release of the original.
Yep, the re-release of the actual theatrical version. That'll be cool. Travis says another difference I think is in George's. We got to know the world as the characters entered it. Cantina, Jabba's palace, so on. In newer stuff, the worlds feel reaction. And I mean, there's just so much. So much. But yes. So anything obviously changes or we get any news or something like that, obviously we'll bring it on the show. We'll discuss it. As usual, if you like the video, hit the like button. If you like what you're seeing here tonight, you like these discussions or whatever, you check out our other content, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you, like I said at the beginning of the show, hit the notification bell because it's very, very, very important that you do so simply because even though we try to get on every Sunday at 8, here we are on Monday at 8. Now, of course, for those people who actually watch after the fact, they don't watch live. I guess it doesn't really matter. But if you do enjoy watching live, then make sure you hit that notification bell. And right before we leave, we're going to grab this last one from Travis, and then we'll end the show. He says, that all said, I still really enjoyed Ahsoka, knowing the criticisms going in. It helped having a far more charismatic supporting cast. It can elevate an otherwise dull load. Yeah, because we didn't even really talk about, like, Baylan Skull and Shin Hati and all that. We'll see. See what happens with Ahsoka Season 2. And, yeah, I mean, basically, we're just going to keep discussing more Star Wars stuff. We'll keep speculating. Don't forget to join and chat in the Discord. A bunch of you guys do so already. You guys keep me busy in there. That's good. And of course, Grandmaster constantly posts a bunch of stuff. I think he posted some Shin Hati scenes from season 2 of Ahsoka last time. So, I mean, again, if you guys are into behind the scenes stuff, check that out. All right? I think that's going to do it for the show tonight. So, with that, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.